Hey everybody, and welcome to another Deep Dive. Today we're taking a look at episode 41 of Michele Brissoni's Forge of Unicorns podcast.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, it is. And he's someone who's got over 2 decades of experience helping companies optimize their software development.
Wow. So he must have some serious insights to share.
Oh, absolutely. And in this episode, we were particularly interested in how Brissoni connects his research on key behavioral indicators, those KBIs,
Right.
to the work of Bob Marshall and Kent Beck.
Okay, I'm already intrigued.
Yeah, and think of it like, we're going to get this behind the scenes. Look at how your company's culture can really make or break your IT performance.
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
So what makes Brissoni's approach stand out?
Well, he doesn't stop at those typical metrics like, hitting deadlines or profit margins.
Yeah, those are important. But
He argues that they're just the surface.
okay.
To really grasp IT health, you've got to dig deeper.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Look at the behaviors of individuals and teams.
It's like you can't just judge the health of a forest by looking at the trees.
Exactly. You got to analyze the soil they're growing in.
So instead of just looking at the outputs, we're also examining those inputs.
Exactly. The human behaviors that drive those outputs.
That's interesting, but how do you even begin to measure something as complex as behavior?
Right. And what makes certain behaviors more important than others?
Well, that's where Brissoni's KBI framework comes in.
Okay. Tell me more.
It's based on behavioral engineering, and essentially KPIs are those measurable actions and interactions that give you a peek into a company's culture.
So it's like a litmus test.
Exactly. We can see if a company is thriving like a lush forest.
Or struggling to survive like a barren desert.
Precisely.
I like that forest versus desert metaphor.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Can you give me an example of a desert behavior
Sure.
and how it could impact an IT team's performance?
Absolutely. So picture a team meeting where there's a lot of nodding heads, but no real open discussion.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've been in those.
People might have concerns, but they're hesitant to speak up.
Maybe fear of repercussions or just general apathy.
Exactly. And that lack of open communication.
Classic desert behavior.
It can lead to misunderstandings.
Missed opportunities for improvement.
And ultimately delays or setbacks in a project.
Right. It's like those little cracks in the foundation that can turn into major problems down the line.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is how Brissoni ties this back to Bob Marshall's hearts over diamonds philosophy.
Ooh, yeah, I love that philosophy.
Me too. Marshall emphasizes that it's the people, the hearts, that form the core of any system.
Not just the processes.
Right. So by understanding and addressing these KBIs, Brissoni suggests we can actually measure and manage company culture.
Wow. So we're not just hoping for a good company culture.
Yeah.
We're using data and observation to guide us.
Exactly. But it's important to consider other factors too.
Like what?
Well, resources, technology, individual skills.
It can't just be all about behavior, right?
Right. It's not about ignoring those things, but recognizing that behaviors play a big role in how effectively those things are used.
And how teams function as a whole.
Exactly. KBIs are like a lens,
Okay.
to help you understand the dynamics at play.
So a team could have all the latest tech.
Yeah.
But if they don't have the right collaborative behaviors to use it, well, it won't magically solve their problems.
Precisely.
So Brissoni's advocating for a more well-rounded approach.
He is.
We're not just looking at the tools and resources.
Right.
But the human element that makes them effective.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where the idea of KBIs being leading indicators comes in.
Okay, what does that mean?
They don't just tell you what happened. They can actually predict future trends and problems.
Now that's powerful.
It is.
So we're not just putting out fires.
Nope.
We're preventing them from starting in the first place.
Exactly.
But how do we actually do that? How do we identify and measure these KBIs in a practical way?
Well,
what are we looking for?
Brissoni suggests focusing on behaviors that directly impact your desired results.
Yeah. So if your goal is to boost team productivity,
Yeah.
you'd look for KBIs like frequency of constructive feedback or speed of resolving conflicts.
Exactly.
So it's about making those connections between what people are doing and what we want to achieve.
Yes. And those behaviors can signal whether a team is on the right track or if there are issues brewing under the surface.
This is all starting to click for me, but I have to admit, it's a lot to process.
It is.
Is there a way to break it down even further?
Sure.
For our listeners who are eager to put these concepts into practice.
Absolutely. Brissoni provides a clear framework for that.
Okay, good.
He suggests starting with understanding the context.
The context of...
Of your specific environment.
Okay.
What are the goals,
Yep.
the challenges, and the existing dynamics within your team or organization.
All right. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
We have to tailor those KBIs to our specific goals and context. See, exactly.
What happens next?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Brissoni talks about the importance of experimentation and continuous learning.
We'll definitely have to dive into that.
We will.
But before we move on, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about these KBIs.
Okay.
Can you give us some other examples of KBIs that our listeners might be able to spot in their own teams?
Sure. Let's consider psychological safety,
Okay.
which is crucial for a thriving forest environment.
Right.
So KBIs related to psychological safety could be how often people speak up in meetings.
Okay.
Do team members feel comfortable sharing ideas even if they're unconventional?
Yeah, that's important.
How quickly are mistakes acknowledged and addressed without assigning blame?
Those are really good examples.
And they can tell you a lot about the level of psychological safety within a team.
Yeah, it's not just about those grand gestures. It's those everyday interactions and how they shape the overall culture.
Exactly.
This has been incredibly insightful so far, but we're just getting started.
We are.
We'll be back in part 2 to explore how to put those KBIs into action, how to experiment with different approaches, and ultimately how to transform your company culture from a barren desert to a thriving forest.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned. All right, so we're back, and we're continuing our deep dive into Mike Brissoni's approach to IT performance and company culture.
And last time we were starting to get into how culture is something that we can actually shape.
Yeah, it's not just this thing that magically appears.
Exactly. And that's where Brissoni's emphasis on experimentation really comes in.
Okay.
He talks about treating culture like this living laboratory,
Interesting.
where we can try different approaches and see what works best in our unique context.
So it's like instead of just observing those behaviors,
Right.
we're trying to actively influence them.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond just collecting data and actually using it to guide our actions.
And then measuring the impact of those actions.
Right. It's almost like applying the scientific method to company culture.
I like that analogy.
So Brissoni even talks about running these small-scale experiments, almost like A/B testing,
Oh, interesting.
but for behaviors.
Give me an example.
Okay, so let's say you've identified a lack of open communication as a problem.
Okay, common problem.
You could try something new,
Okay,
like introducing regular team retrospectives,
okay.
and then track to see if it actually improves communication patterns.
That makes sense. This whole idea of experimentation is really appealing to me.
Yeah,
It takes the fear out of trying new things
it does.
because you're coming at it with curiosity and a willingness to learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I imagine it can be tough to get everyone on board with this experimental mindset.
Yeah, especially in larger companies or
So it's special
when you're dealing with people who are resistant to change.
Right, and that's where leadership is so important.
Okay.
It's not enough for leaders to just talk about experimentation.
So you have to actually walk the walk.
Exactly. They need to model those desired behaviors and create an environment where people feel safe to take risks.
Even making mistakes.
Yeah, because remember, we're trying to cultivate that forest culture, right?
Yes, where learning and growth are encouraged, not punished.
Precisely. And, this reminds me of Kent Beck's work on agile software development.
Oh, yeah. I love his work.
He emphasizes creating a culture of continuous improvement, where teams are constantly reflecting and trying to find ways to do better.
You're spot on. There's definitely a connection between Brissoni's approach and those agile principles.
It's about embracing that iteration, the feedback, and acknowledging that we're always learning and growing.
Couldn't agree more. But Brissoni also highlights another really important element that ties back to Bob Marshall's philosophy.
Of course, people over processes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seems like prioritizing people is a key theme throughout Brissoni's work.
It is.
But how does it relate to experimentation?
Well, for these experiments to actually work,
Uh-huh.
they need to happen in a psychologically safe space.
People need to feel comfortable.
They do.
Sharing their ideas, their concerns, their feedback.
And without fear of being judged or punished.
Because if people are worried about making mistakes,
Right.
they're not going to be open to trying new things
It won't.
or sharing their real thoughts.
Absolutely. So it all comes back to trust and openness.
And that can be really challenging to build, especially in large organizations.
Yeah, it's definitely an ongoing process.
So how can leaders actually foster that kind of human-centered experimental culture?
Well, Brissoni has some practical advice.
Okay, good.
He says, start by being mindful of your own behavior.
Okay.
Are you embodying those values that you want to see in your team?
Right. Are you leading by example?
Exactly. Are you creating those opportunities for open dialogue and constructive feedback?
And actually listening.
Yeah. Are you truly hearing what your team members are saying?
It's about aligning your actions with your words.
It is.
And recognizing the impact of your behavior on the overall culture.
And it's an iterative process.
Yes.
You're going to mess up.
Everybody makes mistakes.
You'll face some pushback, and you'll need to adapt as you go.
It sounds like hard work.
It can be.
But also incredibly rewarding.
It is.
Imagine being part of a company where everyone feels valued, empowered, excited to contribute their best work.
That's the dream.
It is, and it's a vision that's possible.
It is.
If we embrace these principles that Brissoni and Marshall and Beck have shared with us.
Yeah, and there's one last piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about yet.
Okay.
Remember how we mentioned that KBIs can be those leading indicators?
Predicting future trends and problems.
Exactly.
Yes, that's the part I'm really excited to explore.
Okay.
How do we use those KBIs to prevent those desert behaviors from taking root?
Well, that's where we'll pick up in part 3 of our deep dive.
Yeah, wait.
We'll talk about how Brissoni suggests connecting those KBIs to your OKRs, your objectives and key results.
Okay.
And how this combo can help you create a roadmap for success, not just for your IT team, but for your entire organization.
All right, so we're going to shift from identifying those key behaviors to actually putting them into practice.
Exactly.
And using them to create a more thriving and productive workplace.
Sounds good.
Welcome back, everyone. It's time for the final part of our deep dive into Mike Brissoni's work and how he connects those KBIs, company culture, and IT performance.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
It really has. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
We talked about identifying those key behaviors, experimenting with cultural shifts, and embracing that more human-centered approach to leadership.
And now it's time to tackle that predictive power of KPIs.
Exactly. This is the part I've been really looking forward to.
Me too.
So how do we actually go from just observing behaviors to predicting future outcomes?
Well, it's about understanding that behaviors are often those leading indicators of larger trends.
Give me an example.
Okay, so imagine you're tracking that KBI of cross-team communication frequency.
Okay.
And you notice that communication between, let's say, the development team and the marketing team has significantly decreased
All right.
over the past few weeks.
That could be a problem.
It could be a warning sign,
Because there might be a disconnect growing between those teams.
Exactly.
Which could lead to misaligned goals, project delays, even conflicts.
Precisely.
So by noticing that shift in behavior early on,
right,
we can start to address those underlying issues.
Before they escalate.
Before they become major problems.
It's like noticing a small crack in a bridge.
Oh, I like that analogy.
You might not need to shut everything down right away.
Yeah.
But you definitely want to investigate it and reinforce that structure.
Right before it turns into a major disaster.
Exactly. So those KBIs can act like sensors.
Okay.
Alerting us to potential weak spots.
I like that.
Before they cause a complete system failure.
But how do we even know which KBIs to focus on?
Well, that's where Brissoni brings in those OKRs.
Those objectives and key results.
Right, essentially those ambitious goals that you set for your team or organization.
Yeah, those are important.
And Brissoni suggests linking specific KBIs to each of your OKRs.
So we're creating a direct connection between behaviors and desired outcomes.
Precisely.
So instead of just saying, we want to increase customer satisfaction, we identify those KBIs that actually contribute to that goal.
Exactly.
Like responsiveness to customer feedback.
Or speed of resolving customer issues.
Exactly. So we're being proactive.
We are.
We're not just hoping to the best. We're creating the conditions for success.
By focusing on those behaviors that drive the results we want.
Right. This is really interesting stuff. But I do have a concern.
Okay.
Wouldn't focusing solely on measurable behaviors lead to a very mechanical view of company culture?
That's a valid concern.
Where does that human element fit in?
And it's something Brissoni emphasizes,
Okay.
KBIs are not meant to replace human judgment or intuition.
They're tools.
Exactly. They're tools to help us see things more clearly.
Okay.
And to make better decisions.
So it's not about reducing people to just data points. It's about using data to enhance our understanding.
Right.
But still rely on our empathy, our emotional intelligence, and our ability to connect with people on a human level.
Precisely. And remember, we're aiming for that forest culture where people feel supported, valued, empowered to do their best work.
And KBIs can help create those conditions.
They can.
But they can't replace those human connections.
You can't.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening conversation. We've gone from the limitations of those traditional metrics
to
the power of KBIs We've talked about experimentation, psychological safety, and the connection between behaviors and future outcomes.
And throughout it all, we've seen how Brissoni's work aligns so well with the ideas of Bob Marshall and Kent Beck.
Reminding us that people are at the heart of any successful system.
Yes.
And that continuous learning and adaptation are essential for thriving in this ever-changing world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And listeners, we hope this has given you plenty to think about. But before we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final question. What KBIs are you seeing in your own work or your own life? And how might those behaviors be shaping your future and the future of those around you? Remember, even the smallest actions can have a ripple effect. So choose your behaviors wisely and watch your forest flourish. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring.
Thanks for listening, and please remember to subscribe to the Forge of Unicorns to stay up to date with our latest episodes.